All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going deep. We're diving into a world of spies and betrayal and really kind of a crisis of trust.
Sounds intriguing. I'm ready to dive in.
Well, buckle up because we're going to explore the lasting legacy of Kim Philby, the British double agent.
Ah, Philby. His story still resonates, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to uncover how his betrayal didn't just shake the intelligence world, but also had this ripple effect, changing how we see spies in books and movies.
I've always been fascinated by that connection, how real-life events seep into fiction.
Exactly. So, for anyone who might need a quick refresher, Kim Philby was a top SIS officer, the British Secret Intelligence Service, but he was secretly working for the Soviets.
Part of that infamous Cambridge 5 spy ring?
That's right, the Cambridge Five. And when he finally defected to the Soviet Union in 1963, it was like a bomb went off. British society, the intelligence community, everyone was reeling.
It was a complete and utter breach of trust at the highest level, a real turning point.
Absolutely. So, in this deep dive, we're using a historical analysis titled The Shadow of Kim Philby: Deceit, Betrayal, and British Espionage Literature. And our goal here is to really grasp, the huge impact of Philby's actions, especially on how the spy figure evolved in literature.
From the glamorous, almost superhuman spies to, well, something much more complex.
Exactly. We're tracing that shift from, like you said, the invincible hero to characters who are more flawed, more ambiguous, struggling with moral dilemmas.
More human, you might say.
Absolutely more human. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. What was the immediate fallout, like right after Philby's betrayal?
Well, it was a real mix. Total shock, of course, and then this deep, pervasive sense of anxiety. You remember those headlines, Britain betrayed?
Oh, yeah, they really captured the mood.
We did. And along with that, this huge erosion of trust in the government, in the SIS. People were like, if someone like Philby, so high up, could be a double agent, then who else is compromised?
Yeah, that question of loyalty, it just seeped into everything, didn't it?
It did. It wasn't just about spies anymore. It was about who you could trust in your own life.
And to make things worse, Philby wasn't just any double agent. I mean, he was the third man.
Right. The infamous third man, and arguably the most damaging of the Cambridge Five. He had access to so much sensitive information.
Unbelievable. Now, the analysis points out something I hadn't really thought about before.
What's that?
Well, before World War II, the British government was really good at keeping their intelligence work secret. It was like this whole hidden world.
The empire of secrecy, some
Yeah,
called it.
exactly. But the post-war world brought this push for more transparency, which makes sense in a democracy.
Of course. People wanted accountability.
Exactly. And then the Philby affair blew that whole empire of secrecy wide open.
Yeah, it's like pulling a thread on a sweater. Suddenly everything starts to unravel.
Exactly. And then you have the backdrop of post-war Britain, the economy struggling, social changes, this sense of, I don't know, maybe a loss of power on the world stage.
Definitely. Britain's place in the world was shifting.
And all of that contributed to these, well, revolutionary impulses, especially among the upper class, like where Philby came from.
Yeah, there was a sense of unease, maybe even disillusionment with the old order. And some people took that to extremes.
And Philby's background is fascinating, right? I mean, he was born into privilege.
Oh, absolutely. His father was a famous Arabist, worked in intelligence himself. Philby went to Westminster, Trinity College, Cambridge, the whole elite track.
Yet he was deeply unsatisfied.
By 1936, he'd already been recruited by the Soviets.
Yeah.
And get this, by 1940, he's working for the SIS, the very organization he's betraying.
It's almost unthinkable, right? The level of deceit. And all those British agents who died because of him, following orders from a man who was playing them all along.
The damage was incalculable.
Then there's his suspension in 1953 after Burgess and McLean disappeared. That whole strange secret trial. Then he's reinstated, working with the CIA, then Beirut. It's like something out of a spy thriller, but with real devastating consequences.
His story is full of twists and turns, and the final blow was his disappearance in 1963 and the confirmation that he'd been a Soviet agent since 1946.
Another hit to Britain's image on the world stage.
A huge one.
And the SIS, they had this idea that social class equaled loyalty. They were completely blindsided by Philby, someone from their own world.
This blind spot had huge consequences, not just for intelligence, but for trust in general. Jean Le Carré, the spy novelist, really captured this.
Oh, yeah.
One of his characters says, you don't trust your best friends. Trust them, well, less than strangers. really sums up that feeling of suspicion that permeated everything.
Wow, that's chilling. And Philby himself, in his autobiography, even talks about this breakdown of trust. He hints at things that were never officially acknowledged.
And then his book caused this monomania.
Right. Everyone's looking for spies, questioning everything. Whitehall had to rethink its image, how the public saw them.
It was a massive cultural shift, this realization that mistrust could be everywhere, even in the institutions we rely on.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. How did all of this whole Philby affair, change how spies were portrayed in literature?
Well, you see this clear move away from the James Bond kind of spy, the dashing hero, always in control, using illusion and deception as tools.
Right, the glamorous world of espionage.
Exactly. The new spy is more introspective, less sure of himself. He's struggling with loyalty, with moral questions. Illusion becomes this source of anxiety, not a weapon.
More realistic, you mean?
Much more. And the portrayal of espionage institutions changes too. They're no longer these perfect, efficient machines. They're flawed, sometimes incompetent, even corrupt.
And the focus shifts to these internal struggles, these questions of loyalty that we all face, but they're amplified in the world of espionage.
Absolutely. And the analysis highlights three key authors. Ian Fleming, of course, representing the pre-Philby era, then Graham Greene, who starts to bring in those complexities, and then John le Carré, really digging deep into the human psyche.
And le Carré's tinker, tailor, soldier, spy, that's the real turning point, isn't it?
It is. The argument is that Philby isn't just an influence on le Carré. He's almost directly embodied in the character of Bill Hayden.
Wow, so Philby becomes the symbol of self-betrayal on a grand scale.
Exactly. And le Carré's work is urging us to be skeptical, to question those in power, to be true to our own moral compass, even when the world around us is built on lies.
So let's take a step back and look at that pre-Philby spy, James Bond. His first novel, Casino Royale, actually came out in 1953, the same year as the Burgess and McLean affair.
Interesting timing.
Yeah.
And even in that book, you have a double agent, Vesper Lind, but the overall tone is still optimistic, even glamorous.
Yeah, Bond's world is all casinos and gadgets and beautiful women. It's escapism.
And le Carré, he really went after Bond, calling him a ludicrous myth.
What did he find so unrealistic about him?
Well, for one, le Carré saw Bond as this embodiment of escapism and a very superficial kind of cynicism. He even called Bond a sexual hyena and the ultimate prostitute.
Oh.
The point is, Bond replaces genuine human connection with this cold, detached technique. Espionage is just an extension of diplomacy, a game.
A very stylish, exciting game. And Bond, of course, became this global phenomenon, especially with the movies.
Absolutely. But the analysis does make a distinction between the literary Bond and the film Bond.
Oh, right.
The Bond in the books is more nuanced, a bit more introspective, even humorous at times. But he still relies on that masculine image, the witty remarks, that Britishness.
And Fleming based Bond on Sidney Riley, the ace of spies, who was more legend than reality. So
Sure.
the whole Bond persona is this construction, right?
It is. And the plots are formulaic.
Yeah.
The mission, the exotic locations, the fights, the girls, the villain, it's a pattern that repeats.
And that prevents any real character development for Bond. He's static, almost like a superhero.
He is. And his cynicism is almost a professional trait. Killing is just duty. As cool about death as a surgeon, Fleming writes.
No regrets, no moral dilemmas, and his loyalty to Britain is absolute, unwavering.
Which makes him so different from the spies who come after Philby. Smiley, for example, famously says he would never betray love. That's his sin of sins.
And Bond's relationships are fleeting, superficial. Those women are just part of the scenery, really.
They are. And the analysis even points out that sexual deviance is often a sign of treachery in spy fiction, a trope that Smiley, in his ordinariness, actually subverts.
Interesting. You know, it's worth remembering that Fleming himself was a naval intelligence officer, but he spent the war in Whitehall, not in the field.
That probably contributed to the more fantastical elements of Bond's world.
And the idea that Bond is practically invincible, that he can die twice, well, that just reinforces how unrealistic he is.
The analysis suggests that Bond's popularity reflects a desire for a certain kind of hero, a symbol of British strength and loyalty, even if it's a fantasy.
A fantasy that maybe people needed after the war, after all the upheaval.
Maybe. But he's also been criticized as this sexist, misogynistic hero of British imperialism.
But still entertaining, still thrilling. So a very different kind of spy than we see emerging after Philby.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Graham Greene and his novel, The Human Factor. How does his portrayal of the spy differ from Bond, and what was his connection to the whole Philby affair?
Greene gives us a much more human spy, Maurice Castle. And Greene was fascinated by Philby, really intrigued by his motives.
And Greene himself worked for the SIS during the war, even under Philby.
That's right. He knew that world firsthand. And his novel, The Human Factor, published in 1978, even mentions Philby by name.
Really?
Yeah. And it suggests that the problem goes beyond one individual. It's about institutional duplicity, a wider system of lies.
Wow, so Philby becomes this symbol of something bigger.
Exactly. And Castle, the protagonist, is a lot like Philby, a British intelligence officer who's secretly working for the Soviets, blending in, being inconspicuous.
He even has similarities to Smiley. They're both older, ordinary-looking men, prone to nostalgia, a bit lonely.
They are. And Castle is haunted by this constant anxiety. Greene compares it to the prick of an insect.
So the job itself is damaging, even if you're not a double agent.
It takes a toll. And Greene explores these internal conflicts. Habit versus chaos, love versus hate, loyalty versus betrayal.
All those fundamental human struggles.
Exactly. But Castle still wants to be a good person. He says he prefers the truth, except on really important occasions.
So he has a conscience, even though he's betraying his country.
He does. And the novel emphasizes how the institution, the intelligence world, can become corrupt, how it can twist people.
And love becomes a justification for Castle's actions. His love for his wife, Sarah.
Right. Love, that human factor, disrupts the cold logic of espionage.
And it's interesting, Greene apparently admired Philby's skill as a deceiver. And he even believed that sometimes the ends justify the means, especially in politics.
It's a very cynical view, but maybe one that's common in that world.
Maybe. So what was Greene trying to achieve with this novel?
He wanted to make us sympathize with people who were often seen as beyond sympathy, even traitors. He shows us the isolation, the punishment that comes with betrayal.
He humanizes the spy.
Exactly. And he suggests that betrayal can be a natural human response, especially when you're caught in a corrupt system. In Castle's mind, his love for Sarah justifies his actions.
But the system doesn't allow for happy endings. He's forced to leave his wife to live in isolation.
A very realistic and very bleak ending.
The analysis mentions that Greene might have downplayed the real-world consequences of espionage, but through Castle, he shows that anyone is capable of betrayal.
And that those betrayals are often influenced by the environment the institutions were a part of.
So a much more complex and nuanced view of espionage than we get from Bond.
Absolutely.
Now let's move on to Le Carré and Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. This is where we really see the impact of Philby, right?
It is. Le Carré takes those themes of deceit and internal struggle that Greene started to explore, and he goes even deeper. He's even more cynical about Western intelligence methods.
And the character of Bill Hayden, there's no doubt that he's based on Philby.
The parallels are undeniable. The analysis even cites scholars who've meticulously compared the two.
So Hayden becomes this literary embodiment of Philby, of everything he represents.
Exactly, and there are these historical parallels too, like Jim Prideaux, who's betrayed in Czechoslovakia. That mirrors Philby's betrayal of anti-communist groups.
And Hayden's bisexuality, while not a direct parallel to Philby, it's still presented as a kind of betrayal in the context of the time.
Right, like another layer of deception. And that motif of multiple lovers, it often signifies betrayal in both Le Carré and Greene. A contrast to Bond, where it's just part of his masculinity.
It's about trust, really. And Hayden, like Philby, was never suspected. He was admired, seen as a leader.
A father to them all. Someone with star quality. He's even compared to Lawrence of Arabia, which is interesting because Philby's father was compared to Lawrence too.
So there are these echoes, these layers of meaning.
There are. And Le Carré foreshadows Hayden's betrayal early on. Smiley sees him as a kind of Lancelot figure, someone who can help rebuild the circus.
But Smiley eventually sees through the facade. He realizes that Hayden uses people to feel whole, that his arrogance masks a deep insecurity.
And Le Carré himself said that deceit was Philby's life work, that he was a misfit who never found anything worthy of his loyalty.
A tragic figure in a way.
He is. And Smiley sees that Hayden enjoys manipulating people, playing world against world. He's always hiding behind a mask.
A Cheshire cat, as Smiley puts it.
Right, just a smile, nothing behind it.
But there is one big difference between Hayden and Philby.
What's that?
Hayden dies. He's killed by Prideaux, a man he betrayed. It's a more definitive ending than Philby's exile in Moscow.
It is. Le Carré doesn't give us easy answers, but the central theme seems to be the importance of staying true to yourself, even in a world of lies.
And Smiley, he's constantly questioning his own loyalties, the institutions he serves. He even feels resentment towards the circus.
He does. Both Hayden and Philby become these symbols of the public's disillusionment with those in power, those who are supposed to protect them.
And Smiley, even though he's been betrayed by Hayden, he comes to understand him, to see him as a victim too.
It's a complex, almost disturbing level of empathy.
So Smiley is a changed spy, he's marked by betrayal, by loss, and his story is really the story of how we cope with those things.
He's the antithesis of Bond, isn't he?
Absolutely. And Le Carré's work, especially Tinker, Tailor, is built on those themes of betrayal, mistrust, unraveling secrets, all those things that the Philby affair brought to the surface.
Smiley is brilliant, a master strategist, but he's also a good man, a decent man, and that decency is constantly tested.
And in the Carla trilogy, we see him compromise his own humanity in order to win. He uses the enemy's methods, the weapons I abhorred, as he says.
He sees himself in Carla, his enemy, a reflection of the darkness he's embraced.
It's a tragic victory.
It is. And Smiley, he starts out insecure, almost afraid. But then he learns about his wife's infidelity, and he becomes even more cynical. He says, each of us has only a quantum of compassion.
It's like he's lost faith in love.
Maybe. But even though he becomes more distrustful, his core remains good. He even questions the nature of love, whether it's all just self-delusion.
And despite all the betrayal, he still cares about loyalty, about the people he's responsible for.
He does. He uses bad means, but for good ends. He still believes in compassion, even if it's a struggle.
And Hayden, like Philby, he has no real connections. No home, no love, no faith.
He even calls Smiley's love for Anne the last illusion of the illusionless man.
How cynical. And he sleeps with Anne, a final betrayal meant to destroy Smiley's last bit of hope.
But Smiley endures. He doesn't let go of his humanity. He refuses to believe that love is just an illusion.
He's a model of resilience, but not a solution. He shows us how to survive, not how to fix things.
And Le Carré, he didn't admire Philby. He saw him as someone who never faced those internal struggles, who chose to remain an enigma.
Someone who never really looked inward.
Trying to understand Philby, Le Carré said, was like peeling an onion, but you never reach the heart.
And Smiley never fully unravels Hayden either. Maybe that's the point. Maybe there's always a part of us that remains hidden, even from ourselves.
Maybe. But Smiley, he's a different kind of hero. He shows us our deepest convictions, our flaws, our struggles.
He's the product of the Philby shift, this new kind of spy story that's all about moral ambiguity, internal conflict, the struggle to stay true to yourself.
And that struggle takes a toll. The system demands that spies suppress their humanity, but Smiley can't do that completely.
And the title of the book, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, it's a children's game, right?
It is, and it's like this chilling metaphor for how innocence is twisted and corrupted in the world of espionage.
Le Carré sees these institutions, these governments, as playing with people's lives, using them for their own ends.
They're obsessed with power, with national self-advancement, blind to the real cost.
And Hayden, he even echoes Philby's own disillusionment with the SIS. He talks about all the waste, the scandals, the loss of self-respect.
It's a powerful indictment of the whole system.
And Smiley questions it too. He wonders if these institutions are even worth saving.
And Le Carré suggests that the SIS was, in its worst years, infected by this general sickness. And Philby, in a way, forced them to confront it.
So he was both a symptom and a catalyst.
He was. And the ending of Tinker, Tailor, it's so bleak. Everyone is damaged, broken in some way.
That's the real cost of this game.
It is. And the British government, the intelligence establishment, they were stuck in the past, clinging to their fading power.
Philby saw them as helpless, and he was drawn to the Soviet Union, which he saw as more dynamic, more ruthless.
He joined what he thought was the winning side.
And Smiley criticizes the British capacity to spike the advance of history. He sees the circus as frozen, unable to adapt, unable to even recognize betrayal.
It's a paralysis that makes them vulnerable.
So these institutions, they need to evolve, just like individuals do. They need to face these questions of loyalty, of betrayal.
And espionage literature, it becomes this way for British society to process its changing place in the world, its declining empire.
It's like a mirror reflecting their anxieties.
Exactly. And while Bond offered this comforting fantasy of strength and patriotism, Le Carré's work was more about confronting uncomfortable truths.
Even if those truths are painful.
They are. But literature can be a way of coping, of making sense of a world that's full of uncertainty and betrayal.
So what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from all of this?
Well, I think the analysis urges us to follow Smiley's example, To be skeptical, to question authority, to stay true to
To
ourselves.
hold on to our own humanity even when the world around us seems to be losing its own.
Exactly. Because if we don't, we risk becoming like those we fear, like those who betray us.
So Kim Philby, his story is more than just a spy scandal. It's a story about trust, about betrayal, about the human condition.
And it's a story that continues to resonate, to challenge us, to make us think about the choices we make and the world we live in.
And the fact that both Bond and Smiley remain popular, well, that tells us something about ourselves, doesn't it?
It does. We're drawn to both the fantasy and the reality, the hero and the flawed human being.
Maybe it's because we all have a bit of both in us.
Maybe.
Well, that's something to ponder. Thanks for taking a deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.